Owen is an academic advisor in the Education Technology Consultant at Unitec New Zealand. She has been involved with implementing ITC enhanced learning for 10 years to date and is involved with training for faculty around the design and adaptation of blended and distant courses, as well as developing them herself. Her research interests include developing learning spaces, physical and virtual, for effective learning, ePortfolios, e-assessment, literacy and numeracy, embedding support, communities of learning, theories and practice around effective professional development, and ICT, enhanced learning and teaching, underpinned by social cultural principles. Okay, so
I thought what I'd do is give a handout. I'm not normally with the paper business, but I've put the PowerPoint that you'll see today on SlideShare. I'm also hoping to podcast this session as long as it records properly. So there's some links there with quite long URLs, so rather than get you to write them all down, I put it on the handout. There's also some neat resources to do with ePortfolios that you might find useful if you didn't already know, and of course some more references. So, as Alison said, I work for Unitec in Auckland in New Zealand. I'm an academic advisor there, and looking mainly around learning technologies. Prior to that, I spent 6 years in Dubai in the Middle East. So today, what I'm going to do is just look very briefly at some of the issues around ePortfolios and what I mean by Web 2 and Web 2 tools, and then just have a look at a couple of experiences that I've had with ePortfolios and students, one in Dubai and several at Unitec, and then just sort of wrap it up. So, a portfolio, as we traditionally know it, is in theory a collection of artifacts that somebody might put together to, for example, an art student or an architecture professional, to show what you've done in the past. It's very much a sort of a one-way thing. You put it on a piece of paper or several pieces of paper and give it to somebody to look at. Now, thinking more about ePortfolios, one of the things that seems to come up in discussion a lot at our institution is, what is an ePortfolio for? Is it a CV? Is it for promotion? Is it to showcase my best work, as you might do in a traditional portfolio? So one of the things that we discuss quite a lot is you have to have a purpose for your ePortfolio, a very clear idea and maybe this is something that you negotiate with students, why you want an ePortfolio, what's it for? And I actually was watching a video on YouTube just the other day, and it was a study that was done in the US in an education college, and the guy was saying, yeah, I thought when I was doing my education degree that I was doing a professional portfolio. At the end of 3 years, I realised it was a developmental portfolio, and I'm only now putting together my professional portfolio. So that was quite an interesting shift there. Some of the tools that we've heard about at the conference already, ones that have been produced by different companies, and also, of course, your Web 2 tools, they've all got similar considerations. Students need to be able to access them easily. Quite a lot of anxiety about privacy, notions of ownership and design, so lots of flexibility around that, and also being able to take it away and build on it when they leave your institution. Which brings me on to Web 2. Now, Web 2, you might think of it as a set of tools, but it's also sort of an ethos. Whereas Web 1 was maybe a website where you pushed information out, and the most interactivity you might have is if you wanted to book something online. Web 2 is an idea of a community who are able to co-construct knowledge, meaning, ideas. So the user can actually publish maybe their ideas about something they've read or something that they're working on. So, for example, there's quite a lot of big projects. I was listening to a podcast the other day a whole load of scientists are using the technology from Google to map the brain of a mouse. And scientists from around the world can go in, click on various areas of the mouse's brain, and just type in what this part of the brain is and what it does. So that's Web 2. So, thinking about portfolio, an ePortfolio is potentially something that a learner produces a whole heap of artifacts, reflections, ideas. It's a progression, so it increases maybe in sophistication as the learning progresses. And then it can, you can get collaborative exercises going on around it, and of course lots of feedback and comments. I want to show you this as well, so that notion of people coming in with a very clear idea of why they wanted to study. Usually, as we said yesterday, it's because they want to get a job at the end of it. So an ePortfolio must in some way be linked to all of these areas. And another thing that I went and talked to a whole load of people in industry. This is mainly anecdotal. But one of the things that a lot of the people that I spoke to said was, we don't have time to look at all ePortfolios. We find it tough enough to look at the CVs that fall on our mat. But a couple of people did say for their industry, it might actually be quite a good thing, especially for new graduates who haven't got a track record. It might be a really good thing to be able to see what they've done. And also there's a couple of situations, maybe you've got two fantastic people you've interviewed and you can only employ one of them. You can use that as a sort of a selection. Or you've got 10 CVs and you can only interview 5 people. So again, that's selection type thing. So, moving on to some examples. Dubai Men's College, it's part of the Higher Colleges of Technology and has a very strong vocational focus. So there was aviation, engineering, IT, business, and so on and so forth. And 70% of our students were aged between 17 and 20, direct entrance from high school, and 30% of the students were working or between jobs. So they needed the flexibility of being able to work away from campus, but also to work in the evenings on campus. Now the ePortfolio initiative was helped somewhat by the fact that the college made it mandatory for students to have laptops. It was fantastic. And for students who couldn't afford to get the laptops, there were grants up for grabs to fund the purchase. I just also put in the pictures here. Dubai is a funny mixture of innovative, new, forward-thinking and quite traditional. So there's a lot of cultural and religious aspects that we have to bear in mind in most of our courses. But which brings me on to this one. We wanted to use Web 2 tools, and I was talking to Glenn and Anthea a little while ago. What we used to find is, great, we'll use a blog, and it's blocked. Great. Or you'd find one that wasn't blocked, and then you'd come in halfway through the course one morning, and you get this rather nice site blocked pop up, and students would be weeping because they couldn't actually get at their work. So that meant, and I'll just mention this before I move on to the next point, that meant that we had to go for a workaround which was using Dreamweaver to develop websites that students could then host. So not ideal, but. And what the ePortfolio was part of a 40-week foundations course. So these students had just come in and were very much in that transitional period that was talked about yesterday. The career ePortfolio was just one. They had 10 weeks to do their ePortfolio, so they had 4 projects, and this was just one of them. What we did was make sure that the ePortfolio was integrated very much into the syllabus. This meant that when they finally finished their ePortfolio, their English teacher, Arabic, IT, maths and research skills and projects teacher all some aspect of that website. So this meant that the students put in a whole heap of effort, but were, in the assessment side of things, rewarded many times. And obviously very closely linked to learning outcomes, which were directly linked to the graduate profile. This is just an example of one of the students' ePortfolio, so it just gives you an idea of the interface, and as I mentioned before, developed in Dreamweaver. Now what we did was we tried to scaffold the students very strongly through the development of their ePortfolio, which meant initially there's a whole heap of vocabulary that them as second language learners needed to know. But also I think in other areas, if you're teaching for a specific profession, there's a whole heap of profession-specific vocabulary. So this is something maybe that needs to be looked at and supported. The other thing that students didn't really know was if I'm going to find out about careers and where I'm going to go next, and where do I start? So we actually put together a sort of a fact sheet, which was some ideas of areas they could start to research. They wrote a CV and an autobiography. The autobiography they wrote first, and this helped them then write the CV. Another thing that our students really found, and again this was mentioned yesterday, what career were they going to do? What did they actually want to do with their lives? So, and what course should they do to get to this career? So we went through decision analysis type tasks. This is all hosted in WebCT. And the students could, so they've got Ali here, and a little bit of an idea of what Ali liked and disliked. And then they had to choose which course would best suit him, which one he'd most enjoy. So this is all part of the scaffolding for their own ePortfolio. We also had a group of students who were invited onto the local radio and were interviewed by one of the DJs about what their career aspirations were, why they were doing certain things, what they enjoyed about the course. And we podcasted this and used this as part of an authentic artifact which students could interact with to put together, again, their own thoughts about what they wanted to do. We got students to go off and interview people who are already working, make appointments with managers, go and interview them. So some students went the extra mile, really put together a quite insightful gallery of pictures and an overview, a summary of what they saw. But this then linked again to which course they would want to do once they graduated from foundation. We had in Dubai there's something called Emiratisation. Emiratisation is a movement whereby the government wants more Emiratis to take jobs in the workforce. It's actually a really key thing that students need to be aware of at the foundation stage, because again, in the government you might have extra benefits such as paid study leave and so on and so forth that you might not have in the private sector. So Emiratisation was something that they needed to get their heads around. And they in their ePortfolio they put together just a summary of what they thought Emiratisation was and why it was important. They interviewed graduates, partly because it's one of those really nice situations where, oh yeah, I did this and I found this worked and this didn't. So it was just forging those types of relationships. And of course, there are other associated skills. Most of our students were struggling with all sorts of literacy challenges, including academic literacies. So all the way through, there was a support on how do you do the references, how do you avoid plagiarism, and so on and so forth. So this was also part of their ePortfolio. To give students an idea, because it was assessed, we used it's a bit of a blunt instrument, but what we did was we sort of translated the learning outcomes into sort of ideas that students might be able to apply to the work that they were doing. And very easily see, aha, I did this, fantastic, I need to do this, and so on and so forth. And we found it very effective, discussed it in class beforehand, and so on and so forth. So, at the end of, we did this for, well, it's still ongoing, but for the 3 years I was at Dubai Men's College, we did this each year. One of the guys, when he went out to interview a manager, took his laptop, talking about portability, showed his ePortfolio, and ended up with a summer job. So that was kind of neat. There were definitely issues of portability. The best we could do was put them onto a CD for them to take away. And the other thing that we really found difficult to get our heads around were faculty after the foundation weren't interested in students having an ePortfolio. So they kept it during the foundation year, and then, which was quite disappointing. So that was kind of like the next big hurdle to bring on the rest of the faculty on board. So I'm now going to whiz through a couple of things that we're doing at Unitech New Zealand. Before I move on, actually, I need to mention my colleague Tom Cochrane's done a lot of the studies that I'm going to mention here. He's looking at mobile learning, and I wish to thank him formally for letting me have access to his material. So we're piloting, again, Unitech New Zealand is very much a vocational type setup, but also has PhDs and masters, so we're kind of quite an interesting mixture. So we've got boat building, vet nursing. In fact, these are three of the departments that we've piloted with: horticulture, vet nursing, boat building, and there's another three. So you've got languages, music, and design. Now, we didn't have any issues with things being blocked, which was great. So what we decided to do was use a range of Web 2 tools, depending on which tools the tutors felt would be best and which tools the students would prefer. So it's kind of a little bit of a dialogue there, and the students had a matter of choice there. So we went mainly with blogs. You might have heard of Blogger, WordPress and Blogs, maybe. PDWiki we also used. And then we also used the sort of the multimedia type Web 2 tools which students could embed and display in their blogs. We used podcasts as well. Students could either make their own podcasts or use podcasts quite a lot for students to listen to. Institutional support, we went around and we talked to people like the library, who, especially in the area of academic literacies, were very, very happy to put together podcasts and vodcasts to help support students in that area. And we also used a lot of scaffolding, so we're using Moodle at Unitech. We put together sort of an area of resources that students could go look at models, examples, how-to videos, and a whole range of other tools, and easily access them at any point. So some of the things that we found in the 6 pilots that I mentioned, we found that there was a whole heap of benefits that students started to illustrate or display. We got quite a good degree of students using them to plan what were they actually going to do that year. And this is actually quite a very good one. And the tutors bought into this quite a lot as well and started to use the blogs to do their own planning. Reflections. Now, we encourage students, if they wanted to reflect either audio or video. And one of the guys from Tom's study said that if he hadn't been able to record himself with his reflections, he was doing the design course, he probably wouldn't have bothered. And in retrospect, he would have missed out, and this is him saying this, in retrospect he would have missed out on a whole heap of ideas and notions as he went along. Of course, we also had the text reflections, and quite a few students chose, they kind of went to an event or something like that and chose to reflect on what they saw there and pass on ideas to their peers. Interactions, of course, Web 2, you've got lots of opportunities to comment, either informally, as peers, as staff, or as in sort of formal activities. So you'd set up an activity where somebody did a reading and then somebody would comment on that reading. Lots of collaboration. So we had, for example, in horticulture, the students were designing gardens and garden ideas, concepts, using a blog. And they used the blog to sort of say where they were in the design project, take pictures, show their ideas. And we also encouraged them to really set up a sense of community. And this actually was, the picture here was part of a community of practice that formed, and the reflections around being part of that community. We found that both tutors and students by the end of the pilot were much happier to share, or keen to share what they were doing. So this is actually one of the tutors sharing an abstract for a report that she just finished. So some of the positives and not so positives. In boat building, one of the guys used a video to take a shot every day whilst his boat design was being built. So you had this wonderful stock frame photography type effect. He posted this on YouTube and got an offer of a job from a boat builder in the US, which is kind of cool. We've seen his videos. The horticulturists, we got two who won gold awards at the Ellerslie Flower Show. If you're not from New Zealand, it's quite prestigious. So that was really neat for the students to get that sort of outside recognition of all the work they've put in. And we also found students from who previously used the blog more than happy to come and present to current intake of students to say, this was the blog, this is how it works, this is what I did with it. And it was fantastic because the audience, this was a peer, so the audience would kind of say, I'm really scared about privacy, what if somebody and the student who'd already been through all of that was able to, much more effectively than me standing up there, put their fears to rest. Not so positives. Of course, if you're using Box or Google Docs, or you have issues of what if that disappears and all of your work disappears with it. Who owns the things that you put up there? And also you might come across issues of, if you want to put a lot of data on a particular site, you might have to pay to upgrade it. But ultimately, the students are really empowered to take that work and continue to use it after they've left the institution. It is out there in the public domain, but they can keep it private, but ultimately portable. So, from what I found in Dubai and more recently New Zealand, ePortfolios, not a panacea for all of the challenges that students, faculty and universities face, but they can empower and foster learners into a position where they have their own voice, they feel they can be creative, they form communities, and they foster that sort of sense of identity, self-identity. And the feedback from the students, I'd say pretty much the vast majority of students, once they got over the first stumbling blocks, have thoroughly enjoyed putting together their portfolios. As I mentioned, the PowerPoint is in SlideShare. If you lose the handout's also up there at this link here. Thank you very much for listening today, and are there any questions? Yes?
It's a little off topic, but given your experience working in multiple cultures, I'd be interested in your answers. One of our career advisors has described to me difficulty in working with international students from some cultures who have difficulty with self-promotion in terms of getting them used to this style of showcasing their work, but also recognizing that the types of showcases that you would do to different international audiences might be different. So you might have an international student who wanted to go to Dubai or Asia or somewhere else, but the type of thing that they would choose to showcase and how they would present it might be different. Any thoughts on how you might resource that or assist them in making appropriate choices?
very, very good point. And we in New Zealand we face that a lot with Māori and Pacifica students, because that sense of self-promotion is just, it's very uncomfortable. We find that getting students to working groups set up a community, and getting the support of people during the whole process so that they all work together helps improve the sense of confidence. And also we encourage students to think about that they don't have to put themselves out there, but they can maybe think of the role they have in a community, or what they have to offer to a community. So it's kind of just taking the notion and just reframing it slightly, and getting students to setting up that dialogue about that discomfort, or notion that employers might not want to see, well, I did this and it was great, and I did this and it's fantastic, and look at what I can do, and going out into industry and saying, well, what do you want to see in an ePortfolio? Any other questions?
So on that point, I think another point too would be the peer advisors would probably play a good role there too. If you've had other international students, who've gone through that process, it would probably support them.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the graduates from, or people, the learners on different years, putting them together as buddies, that really works extremely effectively.
How did you actually go about integrating into the curriculum and getting students using it?
It was huge. I was kind of lucky in Dubai. Well, lucky. It was a brand new course. So, and I was kind of given free rein. You've got 40 weeks. I want you to develop a 40-week course, and it's got to have a blended aspect. Hooray! It was a huge task. But what it meant is, from the very beginning, looking at the learning outcomes, and then thinking about how ICT might enhance the progression and achievement of these learning outcomes, it was quite easier. Well, it's much easier sort of from that blank slate time start.
What about in New Zealand?
In New Zealand, and I meant to mention this actually, we've had some tutors who've been very keen, and program directors who've been very keen to integrate put, like with vet nursing, with the wiki. Students go out into placements, and they make regular entries into their blogs, and these are all tied into learning outcomes. And they have to have feedback from the employer, and the employer has access to the wiki, and so on and so forth. So that's fully integrated, and that's been very successful. However, on I can't remember which one it was, but there was another pilot that we did that wasn't integrated at all, and it was kind of an add-on. And students at the end of this kind of, it was good, but what a lot of extra work for very little reward, as in assessment grades and so on. So that it's a tricky one, and it's as much kind of persuading your program directors that it's a good plan.
Is that one more question? I was just going to ask about assessment, and I saw you very much digital writing, but for the New Zealand assessment, how did you go about that in terms of if you get some involvement, it's easy to match the learning outcomes, it's not tied in with the assessment or the main course? That's when I find it quite difficult to just
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I didn't put any sort of marking criteria or anything up there was because it varied from course to course. Again, going back to vet nursing, there were very clear sort of, again, a rubric with clear ideas of what was being looked for and how that would be assessed. With the other course that I mentioned, that wasn't integrated, there was nothing really there. So it was, in some ways you could argue it's fantastic because it's creative, it's flexible, but the students really wanted that sense of structure initially, and from that structure could then fly. But also, if you're going to put in all of those hours on top of your study hours, what are you going to get out of it apart from the nice warm fuzzy feeling and the fact that it looks pretty? So yeah, it's a good point. So it's a bit of a stumbling block and something to watch out for.
Over what time did the New Zealand students actually develop their portfolios?
Each of the pilots was a year.
Is there any, have you done any research into use beyond their study? Do they still?
Only anecdotal. And we've had a couple of students who have kind of got back in touch with us and said, oh, I still use it as part of, especially musicians, still use it as part of my journey and also as a showcase of what I've done. So, but I do think it varies, and you kind of go in when you've got access through your Google Reader still to everybody's blogs, and some of them are dead as dodos. They've not been touched since the students have left. So,
and then any indication of using it with employers?
The employers who've been consulted at the very beginning, especially for work placement students, because there is that requirement that they have sort of input. Very, very. In fact, some of the employers have turned right around from being, oh, this is a waste of time, to, wow, this is actually a really good tool and it cuts down on my paperwork because they don't have to send through forms and sign things and do this and do that. And then the tutor at the other end can just pop into the blog. And so the employers who have been involved at that level have been very enthusiastic after sort of the first time around.
So would you say a good initial starting point to publish an ePortfolio in a university or a TAFE might be through integrating it into a work placement unit or a business professional practice unit, as a starting point, because it's a very clear purpose, it's very clearly aligned to the assessments and stuff. Is that a good way to go to if you can't win your uni over and start somewhere? Would you say that would be a good starting point?
Absolutely, because like you say, you've got that clarity of purpose and you've got the relationships already built up with other institutions, so you've got that cross-sectoral type notion as well. But yeah, definitely.
So as you're having lunch too with us, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So any questions you have in advance? So can I get you to thank